Hey guys, thank you, Kathy. All right, hope you are all very well. My name's John. I am going to be talking to you today about editorial. So I'm going to talk for about half an hour, and then we're going to have about 15 minutes of questions. So if you are thinking of questions whilst I'm talking, maybe make a note of them, but don't stop posting your questions for me in the chat box until I'm finished. Otherwise, your question will get lost up in the flow, and I'll try and answer as many questions as I can when we get to it. But I probably won't have time to answer everything. So today I want to talk about big topic, the future of fashion editorial. I don't have any answers, I don't have any answers for you guys about exactly what the future of fashion editorial is. What I want to do today is talk a little bit about a definition of editorial, what editorial means, what it means for us creators, what it means for consumers. We're also going to talk a bit about how editorial has been changing, and a few I'm going to share some of my thoughts about where I think things are, the direction that I think things are heading in. So I'm John. I am a LCF short course tutor. I run a number of different short courses. I don't know if any of you guys have done any of my courses, if there's any familiar names or faces in the room. I started working in fashion nearly 20 years ago now as a journalist. I became a fashion magazine editor. Through working on a magazine as an editor, I got more and more involved in styling and working as a creative director. I also work as a photographer. And this is not particularly unusual. This sort of mix of different specialisms is something that lots of people who work in the fashion media, it's a similar story. So those of you guys listening thinking, I don't really want to bracket myself in as one thing. I don't want to just be a fashion writer or just be a fashion photographer or just be a makeup artist. Everybody works now in such a convergent way. And that's kind of part of what I'm going to talk about today in terms of where fashion editorial, I think, is heading. So first of all, in case this terminology is totally new to you guys, or you don't really know what I mean by the word editorial, I'm going to give you guys a definition. Before I do you want to just type in the chat box anything that comes to your mind if you think about the word editorial? What do you guys think it means? Just type in the chat box for me. Any thoughts? Nice, good. So photographs, magazine work, styling, something creative, comments. That's lovely, Daniela. A magic world, sharing ideas, an aesthetic photo shoot, artistic interpretation. Lovely. Really good stuff, guys. Great suggestions. And you're all right. We use the word in a couple of different ways. So if we think about editorial as a noun, it just means any original content that's being created by a publication. So the word originally comes from newspapers, meaning an article that, a piece of journalism expressing an editor or a publication's opinion on an issue. So it's always meant something subjective, a point of view, an opinion. And so fashion editorial really is the same. If we could have the same dress from, let's say, Chanel. And that dress from Chanel is going to look one way on the catwalk, it's going to look one way in the Chanel advert, and it's going to look different in ID magazine than it's going to look in Vogue magazine. Or you would hope, because these publications are supposed to have different points of view. They are brands with different audiences. So with fashion editorial, it's still this idea of a point of view or an opinion. That particular publication's version of fashion this season. Editorial can be image or text based or a mixture of both. So my journalists in the room, you might be writing features, that's editorial. My photographers, you might be shooting a still life, a portrait, a fully blown fashion shoot. All of it is editorial content. The thing about the editorial content in a fashion magazine, it's not paid for, but there is a very close relationship between the advertisers and what is reflected in the pages of the magazine. And perhaps this sort of line has become too faint or too almost hidden. And it's one of the reasons I think that some magazines are suffering, is because a lot of the time, unfortunately, in fashion, we are really at the mercy of the advertisers and having to basically massage and celebrate the brands because they are the ones with the money. And the money comes to a magazine in the form of the pages of advertising that a brand will buy. So you always see a close relationship. Flick through a fashion magazine that you have in the house, and whatever advertisers you see when you open the magazine, you'll definitely see those names appearing in the photo shoots, in the beauty pages, in the shopping pages. And that's the deal when it comes to advertising and editorial coverage. But you can't directly pay for the editorial coverage. We use the word a lot as an adjective, and so we will often talk about something being editorial, meaning it's maybe something more creative, edgy, non-commercial. So, for example, if we think about ID Magazine and Dazed, they are far more editorial than maybe Hello Magazine or Grazia. And that isn't at all a negative judgment on Grazia. It's that Grazia is more focused on shoppable content. It is less conceptual. It's a more commercial product. And again, it comes down to brand and audience. What is your brand? Who is your audience? And so when we talk about editorial, as a noun, it has to be coming from a magazine, original content that hasn't been paid for. But we could describe something that's being created by a brand as being editorial in style. So, for example, if you look at any Gucci campaign from the last 4 years, those incredible fashion films made by Glenn Luchford, they are astonishing. They are narrative, they're conceptual. They're not selling Gucci just through showing us the clothing. It's the whole world of Gucci, that's coming from the inside of Alessandro Michele's madcap imagination. They're very editorial in style. It's technically not editorial because it's marketing. And so editorial can and often does feature a concept, a narrative, a reference, coded symbols that are there to communicate with a very specific audience. Think about you and your best friends and the secret language you use together. Think about your in-jokes. Think about the slang or the way you talk to each other that might be different from the way you talk to a member of your family or somebody in, if you work in an office, how do you talk to the people in your office? This sort of special connection is what editorial often can create with a reader. And so because it does create this very close relationship, or it can, you get a much more direct line of communication to a reader than you would with something that was explicitly marketing. There are so many different types of editorial image. If you look at fashion magazines, they can be grand and theatrical. It can be simple and stripped back. It can be ugly or challenging. It can be something that's made to reflect the world we live in and how that world is changing. And as a creative in fashion, your editorial profile is what is going to get you your commercial work. Usually this is the relationship. Your editorial is your shop window, it's your calling card, and it's where you will attract or network or meet the people who are going to have the budget to pay you to create. Because often when you're working on editorial, it is unpaid or badly paid, or if there's a budget, you spend the budget on the project. So in terms of the role of editorial, whether you're a writer, whether you're a photographer, a makeup artist, whatever fashion creative you are, there's the element of it being a portfolio, but it's not. Portfolio is a little bit misleading because portfolio sort of suggests that it's just something you need to kind of get together, and then you don't necessarily need to do a huge amount to it. It's not like you do a lot of free editorial work at the start of your career and then you never do it ever again and everything is paid extremely well. Anyone who's been working in the industry for a long time is most likely still working on unpaid editorial projects because it is the work that really creatively fulfills them. And so the role of editorial for me, it's about maintaining a relevance. It's about kind of keeping your work saying something about the world we live in, but also it's that constant networking. And the people you work with on editorial, they are all potential advocates for you and your work who are going to be dropping your name in meetings. You never know where your next job could come from, but it's probably not going to be from a website. It's not going to be from a CV. It's going to be from all of these people that you've been working with on your editorial. It's a bit like the world of haute couture, these extraordinary clothes that nobody in the world can afford to buy. Why do we still have couture? Okay, well, it's, the shop window and the advertisement for a brand to make us want to buy the lipstick or the sneakers or the fanny pack, but it's also about keeping the magic alive. And so editorial has this aspect for us of, it's not only the shop window where we show who we are and where we grab the attention of commercial clients, it's also, for a lot of us, the reason why we do what we do. I don't need to work for free on editorial content, but I do. It's the reason I do what I do. I'd much rather spend my own money on a project where I have an element of creative freedom and it's something I've wanted to do for months or years and I'm really excited about, rather than do something, where I don't necessarily have that fulfillment, and also I'm not necessarily making great money from it. Everything in fashion for us freelancers is a balance, and sometimes payment isn't necessarily in the form of an invoice that gets paid. As important as that is, we all need to keep our lights on and pay our bills. Any of you who want to work in fashion editorial, that it's not going to make you rich. It's not going to make you rich in terms of a monetary value. It does so much else. It's fulfilling in so many other different ways. Now, of course, I think we should be well paid for our editorial, but the reality is we're not. Now, I've talked about how sort of important editorial is for sort of keeping the magic alive and the creativity, but however creative you are being, a fashion magazine needs to toe the line with advertisers that they already have or advertisers they want to have. And so there's always this tension and there's always this push and pull between advertisers perhaps leading the editorial. I don't know if you've heard of things like full look policy, where certain brands, if you shoot them as a stylist, you have to shoot them head to toe as it was shown on the catwalk. So it's not necessarily about mixing that dress with a pair of shoes from a different brand, or that blouse with a pair of vintage Levi's. You're expected to shoot it head to toe. So you sometimes feel like a secretary for clothing. And I think that this brands trying to have more control over editorial so that they can control the message is really detrimental to magazines and has made a lot of magazine content a lot blander, which is contributing to the decline of magazines and how people respond to them. it can be frustrating working on magazines because sometimes you feel like you're working for the fashion house, even though you're not getting paid. Um, sometimes you see an editorial where every single garment is from one fashion house. So it's almost like an advert, but the team working on it didn't get paid by the brand because it's not marketing, it's editorial. And these shoots can be beautiful, they can be amazing, but you do start to lose that that distinguishing line between this is being paid for and this is what we're choosing to create. As a journalist, I used to work alongside a very well-known fashion journalist who was one of my mentors. And he said to me when I asked about it, we went to see a fashion show, it was terrible. As we were walking out, I said, "How are you going to write about that? Because it was so bad." And he said, "If you have nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all." And I'm not saying that that's a great lesson that you should all follow, but it does show the attitude of a lot of fashion magazines. They don't really rock the boat when it comes to where they're going to be getting their money from. I don't want to criticize any publication in particular. I'm not here to do that. This isn't about gossip or shade or spilling tea. But if you look at magazines online, sometimes it can be almost impossible to distinguish the editorial content from paid promotional materials. Here are three stories that I have screen grabbed just a couple of days ago from the Vogue homepage, Vogue UK homepage, and we have a piece which is about a new Dior handbag. We've got a shopping page about oversized tote bags, and we've got a piece about wearing SPF. And the SPF piece, if you look closely, it says partnership. So that one has been paid for. It's what we would call advertorial. The other two haven't been directly paid for, but with the shopping page, and a lot of magazines do this, they do have a disclaimer saying that the magazine does make a small amount of money if the magazine reader purchases any of the items they have presented in their edit. They make a small commission. And this Dior bag piece, this is coming directly from a press release that's been sent to the magazine by Dior. And so in these three pieces, the boundaries are blurred. And so if the magazine is making money from the shopping page, are they really the best tote bags out there that the magazine really want to celebrate because it's coming from a genuine place of experience or expertise or creativity? Or is it just kind of finding a way to appease advertisers and generate more income? When you used to look at a fashion show audience, we'd have the fashion press. Nowadays, we all watch the shows, if we're not there, through social media, and you have this completely kind of unfiltered access to everything, and that's amazing. But it also means that curated editorial experience is perhaps less valued because, I always make the analogy, here you're being handed a cup of coffee, and here you're just having unfiltered, unprocessed coffee beans thrown at you. And so, it's not just a good thing and it's not just a bad thing. The speed of online has really changed editorial production. And it's interesting with a fashion house when you see how so many fashion houses have changed their approach to cope with this speed. Things like collections you can buy the day after the catwalk show, secret and surprise product drops to keep things fresh, changing calendar. It's not that possible for us to do this. It's not that possible for us to do this if we are the ones creating the editorial, because a brand has the time to plan what they want to release and work behind the scenes. traditionally you'd have a fashion show, then editors, journalists, stylists, photographers would take those collections, shape them into editorial, over a period of months, and then the magazines would be released as the clothing was being released. But all of this is in this state of remix and flux at the moment. And good editorial takes time. If we basically have, I don't know, if you have a brand show the collection and it's immediately available to buy, where then do we come in as the fashion press in terms of having the time to shape content for our reader that's going to communicate that, our version of that, to our reader, unless we're working secretly behind the scenes in collaboration with the brands, it's impossible. Audience is interesting as well. I mean, this is a really stupid analogy or comparison to make, but a couple of days ago, I screen grabbed this. It's the incredible film from Margiela, taking us behind the scenes of the creation of their couture collection. It's not editorial, it's coming from a brand, but it's very editorial in its approach. It's a beautiful film. You should all watch it. It's on the Margiela YouTube channel. And this, a few days ago, only had 50,000 views, whereas at the same time I screen grabbed just someone on TikTok posting pretty rubbish videos of themselves, not even doing particularly interesting dance routines, and we're talking here millions of views. And I know that's a really stupid analogy to make between something coming from a couture fashion house, something coming from a, well-known TikToker, but it is interesting to see the difference in those numbers, that reach. Although this video is online and it's available for free to everybody, it has a very different reach and audience. And this is something that I think is important to remember. It's not always about just the biggest numbers, the most amount of followers, the most amount of likes. It's about really understanding your reader and having, basically meaning a lot to a specific group of people rather than trying to generically catch all. As long as I've worked in fashion and long before people talked about print media being dead, and obviously it is not what it once was, but I don't I really don't believe that print media is dead. If it's dying, we're all dying from the day we're born. It's had different sort of peaks and sort of resurgences, but seriously, since before I stepped foot in the office of a fashion magazine, nearly 20 years ago, people have said that print is dying. I think that what is dying is, those kind of very commercial, not particularly editorial publications that, again, like I said, they are a bit too generic. It's interesting to see how lots of fashion brands are moving away from their print advertising. That's a pretty big deal because then it means a lot of the money is being squeezed from the magazines. When you see digital companies who have a huge amount of success trying to return to more, old school, traditional media formats, there's been lots of sort of failure stories recently. There's a piece here which you can find on Flashes and Flames, great media website, talking about Viceland trying to launch Vice TV, and that TV channel, basically being a big flop and contributing to the sort of value of Vice Media starting to plummet. I don't have time to go through all of these slides and read them to you, but feel free to take some screen grabs or kind of take some of this research in your own direction. But I think it's really interesting to explore right now what's happening with print and the print that's not connecting with people, but then the projects that are doing something interesting or unique with print. The companies that are going completely digital, one of the biggest challenges we have at the minute and that directly affects us creating content is the idea of paywalls and paying for content. And this is one of the things that is really tricky to navigate for us, that tension between the speed of online content, but also the lack of resources. Still, the print magazine is given so much more of the budget, so much more of the focus than the online branch of a publication. And so you end up with content that maybe has been created by more junior teams with smaller budgets, less access, less resources. And it's because, it's there to help keep massaging the relationship with the brands. And I think that one of the biggest shifts is going to be creating those real connections with readers so that they're willing to pay for content online as well as in a traditional print format. Just out of interest, guys, how many of you pay for your digital, for any of your digital media? Maybe you subscribe to a digital magazine, or you pay to get behind a paywall, or do you pay, maybe do you pay people via Patreon, some of your favorite YouTubers or content creators? And have a think, if you don't do that, what would it take maybe to make you willing to pay for that digital content, in the way that maybe in the past you might have been okay with spending the money on something printed? It's interesting how in the past few years so many luxury brands have gone back to using print as a way of communicating. The return of lookbooks and catalogues as a way of sharing the worldview of a brand with a customer. And a catalogue not just being a list of products you can buy, we can get that online, but something that actually shares the world of the brand, something that uses the language of editorial. If any of you are in a city where there was a Loewe shop, go in and ask for all of their magazines. They produce amazing print materials, very, very editorial in style. Let me just skip through a little bit because I'm running short on time. If we think about editorial content in fashion magazines, whether we're talking about print or on digital, a magazine is not like a newspaper. There's been a huge success with taking newspapers exclusively digital, because what we want from a newspaper is something that we're not necessarily going to go back to tomorrow. A magazine is different. A magazine is not a newspaper. It's about much more of a shaped editorial, subjective point of view. It's about creativity, access, exclusivity, the idea of quality, which usually either takes a lot of budget or time. The idea of innovation doesn't just come from technology and science, it also comes from having time to create. Journalistically, a magazine isn't just about transmitting information, it's about giving it a point of view, giving it an angle, a voice. And so I'll go back to this idea of brand and audience, the idea that, to really kind of be successful with editorial content now, it needs to mean a lot to your specific reader. You have to understand that reader. And there was this fantastic podcast, it's a couple of years old now, this episode with David Carey, he was CEO of Hearst Media. He left Hearst, he went back to Hearst in a different role. And he talks in this podcast about this need to connect with a reader enough so that they're willing to pay for content. And I think that it's such a simple idea, but it's essential for us to think about. Something that I spend more and more time engaging with and also creating is editorial style content that's actually being created by brands or retailers. So whether it's scents, here we've got sort of a piece that's on scents, whether it's Matches Fashion that have incredible content. They've got all of the great written content, visuals, amazing podcast. I actually find more value often in the kind of editorial style or the journal sections of retailers and brands right now. And one of the reasons is most of the people who are creating this work have been paid, or at least been given a good budget. They've had more time. You don't see that incredible fast pace that you get on a lot of magazines online. because the content, it doesn't need to be so speedy. It isn't just about instantly translating press releases. And I think it's strange that retailers and brands are actually, in my opinion, creating stronger editorial content or editorial style content than I see in a lot of magazines. And for you as a creative, this is something that more and more is going to form a big part of the work you do. Not necessarily working with magazines, not necessarily working just with brands to create their explicit marketing materials, but that kind of that sort of bit in the middle where you are creating the engaging editorial style content for their e-commerce, for their websites, for their social. And in a way, although a lot of this content I've got on these screens is commercial, it's being paid to be created for retailers, for websites, for brands, I think there's more quality and more value in there. And because it's in the world of a retailer, that relationship is kind of out in the open. It's interesting, particularly the Matches Fashion podcast. None of the episodes talk about what you can go and buy in the shop. None of them are trying to spin a product at you. It's just this really fantastic interview podcast. So that's something that I think is important to think about. Not just as a reader and as a consumer of fashion media, but also wanting to enter the fashion industry, more and more this sort of editorial style content brands are producing for all their different digital branches is where we find ourselves working more and more, and actually sometimes being given a lot more freedom than you get given by a magazine. An element of DIY, has always been at the heart of fashion editorial, because fashion editorial leads and commercial often then follows. And this year, with what we've seen happen globally, the idea of DIY and doing it yourself is completely taken over, because people have had to take things back to this DIY, do it yourself way of creating fashion content. Some of the most exciting sort of new fashion creatives, not just this year during global lockdown, but in the past couple of years, have used their social media to just present work they've been creating from their bedrooms. I don't know if you guys know this guy, Christopher Smith. He's amazing. He does all of these he creates all these characters, and all of his pictures are self-portraits coming from his bedroom, and he's done great editorials for magazines. He's worked with some fashion brands, really inspiring, total DIY content. A lot of people have really had to change their practice during lockdown because of the necessity, but in a way that hopefully means that we're going to keep a lot of the positives when things return back to something normal. Something that I've been really inspired by is seeing how a lot of my favorite fashion creatives have been producing work under the constraints of lockdown. And that resourcefulness, and I opened up talking about this convergent way of working with lots of different specialisms. More and more and more, we're seeing this, and a lot of people have had to get really resourceful and creative during lockdown. I'm sure you guys have seen it with the people that you follow. I loved this. One of my favorite photographers, Jack Davidson. This is a shoot he did for British Vogue during lockdown. And he shot, he was locked down in isolation with his family. So the model here is his wife, and the other model in the shoot was his dog. And, this picture to me of Agnes, his wife, means a lot more than when I'm looking at a generic picture of a generic model. This is, for me, an incredible fashion photograph that just means so much more. And the new issue of Love that just came out a few days ago, they're saying it's not a fashion magazine, it's something else. And they've tried to really explode the idea of a traditional masthead and given a lot more younger creatives an opportunity to make stuff. And a lot of the work in this issue was made during lockdown. And so that DIY spirit that really makes the magazine exciting, and that isn't just about shooting Prada Look 17 head to toe, the same photographer as they used in the ad campaign. This, might be the jolt of life that editorial really needs to get people excited in magazines again. Right, I've talked for too long. I'm going to answer some questions. First, before I do, I'm going to do a little bit of promotion, a little bit of promo works, a bit of SponCon. So like I said at the start, I teach across lots of different courses. I just want to mention 3 of my courses that might appeal to you or be suitable. I do a short online course called Fashion Styling Online, which is it's 1 session a week over 6 weeks, which is a really great introduction to working as a stylist and kind of all the stuff that you really need to know. I also do a similar course with journalism, which is 1 hour a week for 6 weeks, where each week you get direct feedback on your work. And I have a new course that I've developed in response to lockdown and the fact that face-to-face courses have all been postponed, where I've designed a really in-depth, longer short course called Styling and Creative Direction Online. And this one is something that runs over 3 months, 2 full days a week with lots of assignments and personal one-to-one feedback and coaching. And so that's my kind of big new course that is going to be running, that I've designed because my face-to-face courses we're not able to run them. So that's a little bit of promotion. Now, let me answer some questions from you guys. So just anything you want to ask me, please do type in the chat box. Maybe something I've been talking about today, or something else related to fashion, styling, getting into the fashion industry. Jenny, some strategies for editing content related to sustainability. I think, Jenny, the thing about sustainability, and something that I see a lot when I'm saying marking student work, is we can't treat sustainability like it's one topic that we need to kind of like cover. It's something that runs through every decision we make and all content and all decisions we make now. It's right there in everything we do. In terms of strategies for editing content created in more creative ways, I think it's about not seeing sustainability as something separate. And I think that it's also not about, I think it's about finding a way of talking about it that feels exciting to your reader. So you have to understand your reader. What is how much does your reader understand about this topic? Is it something that they are totally clued up on, that you don't really need to give any background, they're totally sold, and you can really kind of try to be more innovative and push? Or is it something where you do need to take more baby steps? One way of thinking about this in a really simple way, Jenny, is let's take a TV show like Love Island. I've never watched Love Island, so I wouldn't know anyone's name off it. So if you were going to be writing a piece or creating content that in some way alludes to someone on the island, for me, you'd have to do a bit of background explaining and sort of give me the context. But for my mum, who's obsessed with Love Island, just a first name, she'd know who you're talking about. She knows the backstory. And I think it's about really getting to know your reader, and so you're not covering old ground that they're going to find boring. No, if you know that you're preaching to the converted, then you don't need to sell the idea. You just need to keep kind of finding interesting new stories. And if you're talking to a reader who it does need a bit more convincing, then you have to make it as relatable and as relevant to them as possible. Is what I would say. Dion, as a young creative who wants to start a magazine, should you start from a digital platform or print or both? Dion, I think whatever you think is going to work, whether it's going to be print or digital, I think it's about whichever format you use it to the best of its ability. So if you're going to be doing something digital, it means you can play with moving image, you can play with being more reactionary, more engaging, more interesting in terms of maybe a digital interface. if it doesn't really know that specific reader and make it niche, nobody needs another generic print publication. Don't be scared of making it niche and making it mean everything to that person who picks it up, like they feel it was made just for them. And be aware, Dion, that the print magazine isn't going to make you any money, but it's going to be, this kind of, it is going to be a way of getting into meetings with brands, and your shop window, basically like a really amazing portfolio. But don't focus on trying to make the magazine directly make money in terms of advertisers, because then that becomes the entire focus, and you might end up diluting something before it's even got started. Sarah, hey John, how do you work with featured brands in editorial? Do they approach a certain magazine campaign, or do you approach them yourself? So Sarah, what usually happens is your editor will give you a brief, and it might be that they say, okay, Sarah, I want you to do me 10 pages for the next issue. The theme is, I don't know, the theme is monochrome, or the theme is Georgia O'Keeffe, or the theme is whatever it is. And they will usually either give you a list of advertisers or brands they'd like you to include, or you're just kind of expected to dig in and find that information yourself by looking at the advertisers and the type of brands the magazine already features. And if you're at all in doubt ever, you just ask your editor for clarification. And so basically that you will get commissioned. You can't call in the big brands for something if you haven't been commissioned. So if it's a test shoot or something you want to submit to a magazine, you can't really get access to brands. So you do need a commission. And then if it's something that's more specific, like a whole story where everything is, I don't know, let's say you're doing a Comme des Garçons story and it's all the clothes are Comme des Garçons. Again, your editor will approach you and say, Sarah, we're doing a Comme story in the next issue. I think you'd be great for it. Do you want to kind of come on board and do it? And if you think I don't really want to do a story that's just one brand, then you would pass on it. But it's all coming from your relationship with your editor. That's how it works. And then then you're reaching out to whatever brands you also want to include. You reach out to the PR office and try calling in whatever pieces you actually want to shoot. Mariana, which career do you think you should study if you want to be a fashion stylist? I think it's really important to kind of have some basic ideas around how the fashion industry works and how to go about things. So something like a short course, something that really sort of teaches you, here is what styling is, here is how to get started. But in terms of a bigger topic to study kind of over a longer time, I think it's got to come from you and your passion. It might be art, it might be design, it might be photography, it might be something totally different. I think that it's absolutely not essential to do a specific degree in something like styling, but I'm not also saying that it's a bad idea to do that. I think that whatever you are passionate about, whatever you maybe study, in many different ways that can come into the work you maybe end up creating in a fashion context. I think the only thing that you do need to have is just a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a plan, so you really understand how the industry operates and you can make a proper sort of plan of action on how you're going to try and tackle it. So I hope that answers that question, Mariana. There's lots of questions that unfortunately I'm not going to be able to answer now. I'm going to answer, Kathy, if it's okay with you, I'm going to answer one or two more because I banged on and on a bit too long. So I'm just going to answer one or two more, but sorry if I don't get to yours. I've just been trying to pick them from the list. All right, let me pick a random one. Claudia, I have a small brand and it's really difficult to get features without paid promotion, which is far too costly. How do you get in? Networking? So what I would say is with your own platform that you can control, creating content that's going to be as exciting and as engaging as possible, where the focus isn't on necessarily just on the product, it's about the world of your brand, and thinking about the type of magazine you'd want to be featured in. And if it is a magazine that is very commercial, the only way might be to network and to look into paid promotion. If it's smaller publications or more editorial publications, you need a story that they can tell. You basically need to give them a soundbite or an angle that's a gift. So, look at the type of pieces that, let's say, ID Online or Dazed Digital publish. It's always got some kind of political or contemporary spin. It's never, look at this handbag from this new brand. It's always, the brand, the brand experimenting with, AR in a way that you won't believe, or it's, the something designer shining a spotlight on the something community where they're from. It's always somehow aligning that your brand or your product to a story that's going to inspire people. And that really is where you're trying to then target specific publications, giving them a story to run because it makes their lives easier, having visuals that are ready to run, that don't feel too commercial, that feel like they could live on a website. Or if it is more that you're aiming for that very commercial coverage, then it is more difficult. In terms of, if we're going to relate this directly to editorial, it's about a story that's going to inspire not only a reader but grab an editor's attention, because it kind of, whether the article or the feature almost writes itself. Let me see, one more quick one. Here, this one's fun. Will more diverse non-human models replace HF models or virtual models? I think that it's interesting to see the digital influencers and the sort of CGI models. There's a couple of well-known ones. I always feel like it's very sort of, it always feels like a bit of a paid promotion to me. And I think that there's a definite problem in terms of diversity with a lot of these digital influencers, because they become almost these like collage or composites of like the best of everyone. And so it creates this sort of fake individual who is taking work away from 17 different models who maybe did exist in the real world. But I think it's an interesting thing to think about how we can do it in a way that feels genuinely cool or interesting. The problem that I find with a lot of the digital influencers or digital CGI models is they just don't feel very cool. They feel a bit to me like they're made by middle-aged men trying to appeal to like, a Gen Z sort of customer or audience. And so I think it's about, what I want to see is kind of that digital artwork and that those ideas, but being created by the next generation, so it feels like it's coming from a much more authentic place. That word authentic is so important with editorial, because that really is the success of editorial. Does it feel authentic? Okay, guys, sorry if I didn't get to answer your question, but it was really great to see you all in the room. Hopefully it gave you some food for thought today, gave you some things to go off and research or think about. Take care. Hopefully I'll see you in one of my future courses. And if you do have any questions about any of the courses, you can get in touch with the short course team.